All right, people. Let's talk about Family Guy, Season 21, Episode 4, titled Filipino Cheese. Now, before we even dive into the mess that is this episode, I gotta give a little nod to the director, Joe Vox. This guy's got a history with the show. Some good episodes, well, let's just say some that make you scratch your head. He's been around long enough to know the Family Guy formula, right? But sometimes it feels like he's just throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. And in this case, a whole lot of that spaghetti ended up on the floor. It's like he decided to go for maximum chaos, minimum sense. And frankly, it's a bold, albeit terrifying choice. And you know what's even wilder? This episode dropped back in October of 2022, right around the time the midterms were heating up, and the whole world was bracing for whatever chaos November was going to bring. Meanwhile, the Family Guy writers and Joe Vox were in a room somewhere, meticulously crafting jokes about sex therapists and tomahawk steaks. It's a weird juxtaposition, the absurdity of Quahog versus the slightly less absurd absurdity of real life. But trust me, by the end of this ride, you'll be begging for the relative normalcy of political commentary. This episode has some moments that are so bizarre, so out of left field, you'll wonder if they accidentally aired a script from a different show. We're talking about a plot that somehow involves a restaurant with a bizarre ordering system, a marriage counseling session gone hilariously wrong, and a treehouse that's more of a panic room. So buckle up, because this is going to be a wild one, and I promise you, there's a twist at the end that will make you question everything you thought you knew about Peter Griffin's, well, everything. So, hey, if you're new here, you know the drill. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, because we're diving deep into the animated abyss, and you don't want to miss out on the... Oh, wait, did I forget to mention the part where Peter possibly loses his mind and starts acting like a completely different person? Yeah, that's coming. You're welcome. So, at its surface level, this episode is about Peter and Lois trying to spice up their sex life, which, let's be honest, is a recurring theme in Family Guy, usually ending in disaster. They go to this fancy new restaurant, His and Hers, which sounds like it's designed to appeal to both genders simultaneously, but really just serves as a vehicle for some truly bizarre customer service.
Peter gets his dude cave table with beer and Papa-Shot, and Lois gets her wine and Facebook scrolling station, which is apparently where she discovers the questionable aesthetics of other people's babies. The central conflict kicks off when Lois tries to order something slightly different from the menu, and the waiter, in a moment of pure, unadulterated dickishness, declares they are a dick restaurant and no substitutions are allowed. This leads to Peter ordering an $85 tomahawk steak and Lois opting for a watercress salad, while little Stewie, who's apparently in on this whole family outing, just wants a personal pan pizza. It's a classic setup, right? Family goes out, family encounters slightly weird situation, chaos ensues. But then things take a sharp left turn. Peter starts having these weird flashbacks, or maybe they're premonitions, about his past with Lois, and the whole scene with the sex therapist comes into play. They're trying to work through Peter's, shall we say, performance issues using hypnosis. And this is where the episode really starts to unravel, or perhaps tighten its grip on absurdity. The trigger phrase, extra extra, is supposed to make Peter relax and think of vanilla ice cream on a beach, but it gets hilariously interrupted by push notifications and Peter's inability to focus. Meanwhile, Stewie, bless his tiny evil heart, is building a treehouse that's apparently a man cave/dance studio, which he invites Brian and Chris over to see. This whole treehouse subplot feels a bit like filler, but it does give us some classic Brian and Chris banter, where they're just tearing Stewie's taste apart, calling his whole setup cliché and desperate, especially after he upgrades from a Vizio to a Sony TV, which Brian apparently finds offensive. The writing quality here feels a little shaky. The restaurant scene is a decent setup, but the dick restaurant line feels a bit forced. The hypnosis plot, while having potential for laughs, gets bogged down in the execution. It's like they had a great idea for a recurring gag with the trigger phrase and push notifications, but they couldn't quite make it land consistently. And the Stewie plot? It feels like it was tacked on to give the younger characters something to do, but it doesn't really contribute much to the main story. This episode doesn't feel like a turning point for the season. It feels more like a standalone experiment that didn't quite succeed. It's not a complete disaster, but it's not a classic either.
It's an episode that tries to juggle too many balls and, in the end, drops most of them. The pacing feels a bit off, with the hypnosis scenes dragging a little and the treehouse scenes feeling rushed. It's an episode that definitely has its moments, but they're scattered amongst a lot of less-than-stellar material. My initial verdict? It's a middling episode, maybe a 5.5 out of 10. It has some good jokes and some interesting character interactions, but the overall story is a bit muddled and the pacing could have been better. It's an episode that you'll probably forget shortly after watching, which is a shame given the potential it had. Okay, let's dissect some of the more memorable moments from this episode. First up, the his and hers restaurant experience. Picture this. Peter and Lois are at this place that's literally designed with separate areas for men and women. Peter gets his manly man corner with beer and a basketball game, while Lois gets her wine and social media doom scrolling station. It's supposed to be this futuristic, couples-friendly concept, but it immediately feels like a recipe for disaster. And the waiter, oh, the waiter. When Lois asks for a simple substitution on her salmon, no dill cream, because, some people don't like dill cream, what a concept. The waiter looks at her like she just insulted his mother. He says they're a dick restaurant. Now that line is delivered with such deadpan absurdity that it's almost funny. Almost. The problem is, it feels like a joke that's trying too hard. Like the writers thought, how can we make this waiter incredibly rude and memorable? And they landed on Dick Restaurant. It's a cheap laugh, and while I appreciate a good cheap laugh, this one felt a bit unearned. It sets up this conflict that leads to Peter ordering that ridiculously expensive steak and Lois going for a salad. But the whole premise of a his and hers restaurant is already so contrived, this added layer of dickishness feels like overkill. What I would have done differently is lean into the absurdity of the his and hers concept itself. Imagine the waiter being overly enthusiastic about the gendered sections, trying to enforce it with bizarre rules, rather than just being a plain old jerk. Make it so Peter can't watch sports because it's too feminine for his designated area, or Lois can't scroll Facebook because it's too masculine. That's where the real comedic gold is, not just in a waiter being rude. My personal reaction to the scene?
It was a solid meh. I wasn't laughing, but I wasn't completely turned off either. It's the kind of joke that plays out in your head for a second and then evaporates. Next up, the hypnosis session. This is where things get really interesting, or at least they should. Lois is fed up with Peter's lack of enthusiasm in the bedroom, and they go to a sex therapist. The therapist suggests hypnosis, which sounds promising. The idea is that Peter will zone out and imagine himself on a beach eating ice cream whenever he hears the trigger phrase. This is prime Family Guy material. Peter's incompetence, Lois's exasperation, and a ridiculously silly solution. The trigger phrase is extra, extra, meant to be reminiscent of old newspaper headlines, which adds a nice little layer of retro charm. But the execution? Oh, it's a mess. The therapist is mid-hypnosis, mid-trigger phrase setup, and suddenly Peter's phone buzzes with a push notification from Chrissy Teigen cyberbullying someone. It's a classic Family Guy move, taking a mundane modern annoyance and injecting it into an otherwise serious or absurd situation to create comedic chaos. The problem is, it happens too quickly, and it derails the entire hypnosis gag. Peter doesn't even get properly hypnotized before his phone ruins it. And then, when Lois tries to get him to remember what happened, he's completely clueless. The therapist, in a moment of crushing defeat, suggests sad spaghetti. It's a funny line, but the overall sequence feels rushed and underdeveloped. I feel like they could have milked this hypnosis thing for so much more. Imagine Peter actually getting hypnotized, but instead of thinking of a beach, he's convinced he's a pirate or a race car driver, and his performance in the bedroom becomes a full-blown reenactment. Or what if the trigger craze accidentally gets activated in public, like at the dinner table with Lois's parents? The missed potential here is staggering. My personal take? It was a frustratingly funny scene. The setup was great, the interruption was funny, but the payoff was non-existent. It's like they had all the ingredients for a delicious cake, but forgot to turn on the oven. Then we have Stewie's Key House. I know, it's a kid's show, but Stewie's elaborate schemes are always a highlight. He's building this ultimate man cave dance studio hybrid. He invites Brian and Chris over, and their reaction is pure comedic gold. They spend the entire time subtly and not so subtly tearing down Stewie's taste. They call it cliché, desperate, and say it literally not one thing about that place says Stewie. Brian's particular disdain for Stewie's choice of a Sony TV over an LG is hilarious, especially with the jab at Consumer Reports. And Chris's comment about spitting out his Costco quiche into Stewie's workout area? Chef's kiss. This scene is a masterclass in passive-aggressive character assassination. Stewie is beaming, thinking he's created the coolest place ever, while Brian and Chris are internally screaming about his lack of taste. The funniest part is that Brian and Chris have absolutely zero self-awareness about their own questionable choices in life. It's like the pot calling the kettle black, but the pot is made of solid gold and the kettle is made of pure garbage. What I would change? Honestly, this scene works pretty well. The dialogue is sharp and the characters are acting exactly as they should. Maybe I'd add a quick visual gag of Stewie wearing a ridiculously oversized designer outfit while trying to be cool, juxtaposed with Brian and Chris's utter disdain. But that's nitpicking. My personal reaction? I loved this scene. It's the kind of character interaction that makes Family Guy great. It's petty, it's mean, and it's hilarious. Moving on, the whole Munchausen my proxy conversation between Lois and Bonnie. This is a bit of a darker, more niche joke, but for those who get it, it's a doozy. Lois is explaining Peter's reluctance in the bedroom, and she uses the phrase, "Peter doesn't always Munchausen my proxy." Bonnie, bless her heart, is completely lost. She tries to interpret it literally, thinking it has something to do with Australia. It's a classic case of one character being way over Lois's head, leading to confusion and awkwardness, and that's exactly what makes it funny. The joke itself relies on an obscure medical condition and a misunderstanding of a complex phrase, and the writers just let Bonnie flounder. It's a bit of a deep cut, and I appreciate that. It's not just a surface-level gag. It requires some cultural literacy to fully appreciate. My only critique is that it's so obscure, a lot of viewers might just miss it entirely. I'd love to see Lois have to explain it, or Bonnie continue to dig herself deeper into the misunderstanding. Perhaps she starts researching Munchausen by proxy on her phone, only to come up with increasingly alarming search results. My personal reaction? I chuckled pretty hard at this one. It's the kind of joke that makes you feel smart for getting it, even though it's probably just the writers being clever.
Finally, let's talk about the ending. After all the hypnosis fails and the general marital awkwardness, there's a moment where Peter seems to have actually remembered something. Lois farts the Pledge of Allegiance. Yes, you read that right. And Peter remembers it. Lois is impressed, saying, "Peter, last night was amazing." And Peter's response? He's just getting in the shower because of the indivisible part. It's a completely nonsensical, absurd ending that ties back into the failed hypnosis. It's like the writers threw their hands up and said, "You know what? Let's just go with the dumbest possible outcome." And it works in a bizarre way. It's the kind of ending that leaves you going, what did I just watch? It perfectly encapsulates the chaotic, nonsensical nature of Family Guy. What I would change? Nothing. This ending is pure Family Guy. It's gross, it's unexpected, and it's utterly ridiculous. It's the cherry on top of a very strange Sunday. My personal reaction? Utter bewilderment mixed with a grudging admiration for the sheer audacity of it all. It's the kind of thing you'd replay a few times just to make sure you heard it correctly. So yeah, those are some of the moments that stood out, for better or worse. Now, let's talk about the characters and how they fared in this particular episode. Peter Griffin, as always, is the epicenter of much of the chaos. In this episode, he's the oblivious husband struggling with, well, everything really. His biggest moments are in the hypnosis scene and his eventual baffling memory of Lois farting the Pledge of Allegiance. He's portrayed as the classic dim-witted husband who's completely out of touch with his wife's needs. His performance in the hypnosis scene, where he's easily distracted by his phone, is peak Peter. It's funny because it's so relatable in its absurdity. He's not malicious, he's just Peter. He's not given a lot of depth here, but he serves his purpose as the catalyst for Lois's frustration and the object of the therapist's bewilderment. What does this say about his story? Honestly, not much. It feels like a recycled plot point for him, another instance of him being clueless about his marriage. He's not evolving, he's just existing in his usual state of befuddlement. Lois, on the other hand, gets to be the exasperated wife, which is also a familiar role for her. Her frustration with Peter's bedroom performance and her attempt to fix it through therapy are the driving force of the main plot. She's more proactive here than Peter, but even her efforts are met with hilarious failure. Her interactions with Bonnie about the Munchausen joke are a standout, showing her wit even when dealing with Peter's limitations. Her role here is to be the voice of reason, or at least the voice of desire, that's constantly thwarted by Peter's idiocy. It doesn't really push her character forward, but it solidifies her position as the long-suffering matriarch. Stewie, in his treehouse subplot, gets to be the precocious, slightly over-the-top architect. His enthusiasm for his man cave dance studio is infectious, even if his taste is questionable. His interactions with Brian and Chris, where they tear down his creation, are classic Stewie George. He's the creative genius whose genius is unappreciated, or rather, actively mocked by his supposed friends.
His role here is to provide a contained yet equally absurd secondary plot. It shows his ambition and his slightly misguided attempts to impress, which is a core part of his character. Brian, as usual, is the condescending intellectual who can't help but critique everyone else. His scathing remarks about Stewie's treehouse are spot on and delivered with his signature smugness. He's the audience surrogate in the treehouse scene, voicing the thoughts many viewers might have. His character here is purely observational and critical, which is his default mode. He doesn't really contribute to the main plot, but his snarky commentary adds a layer of humor. Chris, meanwhile, is mostly along for the ride, echoing Brian's sentiments with a more simple, blunt delivery. His comment about spitting out the quiche is perfectly in character, crude and unexpected. He's the slightly less intelligent foil to Brian, providing a more straightforward comedic response. He's not given much agency, but his presence alongside Brian amplifies their shared disdain for Stewie's design choices. The episode uses him more as a sounding board for Brian than as a fully developed character. Quagmire and Joe have a brief but memorable moment discussing sex therapy and Joe's spelunking ability. It's a quick gag that highlights their character archetypes, Quagmire's sexual deviancy and Joe's unique marital situation. It's a blink and you'll miss it moment, but it's effective in reminding us of their established personalities. Bonnie, as mentioned, is mostly there to be confused by Lois's vocabulary, but her brief interaction with Lois about Joe's accident and therapy adds a tiny bit of depth to her character, showing a glimpse of her marital struggles.
Overall, the main characters are pretty much playing their usual roles. Peter is the idiot, Lois is the long-suffering wife, Stewie is the megalomaniacal child genius, Brian is the smug intellectual, and Chris is the dopey son. There aren't any major character arcs or developments here. The episode functions more as a series of vignettes that highlight their established personalities and the show's typical comedic dynamics. It's not necessarily a bad thing, as consistency is often key in a long-running show like Family Guy, but it does mean that this episode won't be remembered for any groundbreaking character moments. Now, for the real treasure hunt, the hidden gems and Easter eggs in this episode. First up, the opening theme song. You know the one. It seems today that all you see is violence in movies and sex on TV. While it's a classic Family Guy intro, this particular rendition has a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in tone that hints at the episode's themes. It's not a huge deviation, but the way Peter sings it, with that slightly more world-weary inflection, subtly foreshadows his marital woes and the episode's exploration of sexual dissatisfaction. It's like a tiny auditory wink from the writers, letting you know that this isn't just another random episode, it's about a couple hitting a rough patch. Most people just tune out the theme song, so this detail is easily missed, but it's a nice touch for those paying attention. Next, let's talk about the restaurant name itself, His and Hers. This is more than just a restaurant name. It's a commentary on gendered marketing and societal expectations. The entire premise of the restaurant, with its segregated seating and services, is a satirical jab at the idea that men and women need entirely different experiences. The fact that Peter immediately embraces his manly side while Lois retreats into her own social media bubble is exactly what the show is poking fun at. It's a subtle dig at how we often reinforce gender stereotypes, even in seemingly innocuous things like dining out. Casual viewers might just see it as a quirky restaurant name, but it's actually the foundation of the episode's early commentary on relationships and individual desires within a couple. Then there's the waiter's line, "We're a dick restaurant." This is a phrase that's so blunt and unexpected, it's designed to grab your attention. While on the surface it's just a rude remark, it can also be seen as a meta-commentary on the show itself.
Family Guy is often criticized for its crass humor and shock value, and this line, delivered by a character in the show, almost feels like the writers acknowledging that they themselves can be a dick restaurant when it comes to comedy, serving up whatever they want without much regard for the audience's sensitivities. It's a cheeky little wink to the fans who understand the show's often provocative nature. Moving on to the hypnosis scene, the trigger phrase is, "extra, extra." This is a clever callback to old-school journalism and a time when information was disseminated more traditionally. It's a nice contrast to the modern distractions like phone notifications that interrupt the hypnosis. The writers are subtly contrasting the old ways of communication and connection with the new, fractured attention deficit world we live in. It's a small detail, but it adds a layer of depth to the scene beyond just Peter's inability to focus. The push notification from Chrissy Teigen, "Cyberbully's a nobody," is a very specific and timely pop culture reference. It's a fleeting moment, but it grounds the absurdity of the hypnosis scene in the current social media landscape. It shows the writers are aware of what's happening in the cultural zeitgeist and are weaving it into their jokes, even if it's just a background detail that serves to distract Peter. It's a testament to how much they try to stay relevant, even if some of the references fly over people's heads.
Finally, let's look at Stewie's treehouse upgrade. Brian points out that Stewie swapped his Vizio for a Sony TV. Brian's disdain for Vizio is almost palpable, and his insistence on LG being the real way to go is a specific and somewhat niche tech snobbery. This is a detail that many would overlook, but it speaks to the writer's attention to detail and their desire to inject relatable, albeit sometimes petty, arguments into the show. It's a small detail that adds realism to Stewie's ambition to have a truly man-cave-worthy space, and Brian and Chris's judgmental nature. It's a subtle jab at consumerism and the constant chase for the best technology, even in a child's elaborate fort. So, what if they did it differently? Let's take the hypnosis scene. The core idea of Peter being so easily distracted by modern tech is gold, but the execution felt a bit rushed. What if instead of a phone notification, the trigger phrase got mixed up with something even more mundane and disruptive? Imagine Peter is being hypnotized, and just as the therapist says, "Extra, extra," the doorbell rings.
It's some kid selling Girl Scout cookies, or maybe a package delivery. Peter's attention snaps to that, and he completely forgets the hypnosis. Then, when Lois tries to use the trigger phrase later, it's still tied to the doorbell. So every time she says, "extra, extra," Peter's convinced he needs to go answer the door. Lois, trying to have a romantic moment, keeps getting interrupted by Peter running to the front door, only to find nobody there. That would have created a recurring physical comedy bit throughout the episode, and it would have leaned into Peter's easily distracted nature in a more consistent way. Alternatively, let's talk about the his and hers restaurant. The Dick restaurant line felt like a shortcut. What if the whole concept of the restaurant was more actively enforced? Imagine the waiter coming over and sternly telling Peter, "Sir, your masculinity levels are too high for this section. We're going to have to move you to the man zone." Or telling Lois, "Ma'am, that salmon is too assertive for your designated relaxation area. Perhaps a lighter option like kale." The humor would come from the extreme, nonsensical enforcement of gendered spaces, rather than just a rude waiter. It would force Peter and Lois to confront the absurdity of the situation head-on, leading to more direct conflict and comedic reactions. The Dick restaurant line is just one guy being a jerk. Making the entire restaurant a satirical playground of gendered absurdity would have been much more in line with Family Guy's brand of social commentary. All right, let's wrap this up. My verdict on Filipino cheese is a solid 6.2 out of 10. Why 6.2? Well, the episode had some genuinely funny moments, particularly in the banter between Brian and Chris about Stewie's treehouse and the sheer audacity of Lois farting the Pledge of Allegiance. Those moments earned it points. However, the central hypnosis plot felt underdeveloped, and the his and hers restaurant premise, while interesting, was ultimately squandered with a cheap joke. The pacing felt a little uneven, with some scenes dragging and others feeling rushed. The episode is definitely for the die-hard Family Guy fans, the ones who appreciate the show's willingness to be crude, absurd, and occasionally insightful about relationships. Casual viewers might find it a bit too messy. What would have pushed the score higher? A more cohesive plot and a better payoff for the hypnosis storyline. If they had leaned harder into the comedic potential of the hypnosis failing, or if the restaurant's gimmick had been explored more thoroughly, it could have been a much stronger episode.
Ultimately, this episode felt like a missed opportunity. It had the ingredients for something great, but ended up being just okay. It reminds me of Joe Vox's directing style sometimes. Lots of ambition, but not always the sharpest execution. He's capable of great things with this show, but this particular outing felt like he was just going through the motions, albeit with a few inspired bursts of ridiculousness that thankfully kept it from being a complete dud.
All right, let's dive headfirst into the beautiful chaos that is Family Guy Season 21, Episode 5. You know, I was thinking about Seth MacFarlane, the guy who's basically got his name stamped all over this show, and his career is just a wild ride, right? He's the guy who gave us American Dad, The Cleveland Show, and of course, this little gem. He's got this knack for taking something and stretching it out, sometimes to its breaking point, and then somehow just barely pulling it back. It's like he's got a rubber band for a plot, and he just keeps snapping it, hoping it doesn't break. And this episode? Oh yeah, he definitely gave that rubber band a good workout. We're talking about a story that involves a busted knee, a questionable calendar shoot, and a postal worker's existential crisis. Seriously, if you thought this episode was just going to be about Peter being an idiot, you are in for a wild, bumpy ride. And I promise you, it gets even weirder than a bird stealing a laptop. This one's got more twists than a pretzel factory run by snakes. Hey, if you're finding yourself enjoying this deep dive into Quahog's finest, do me a solid and smash that subscribe button. It really helps keep this whole operation humming, and honestly, I need all the help I can get to make sense of this stuff. Plus, you don't want to miss out on the next time we try to figure out what on earth is going on in our favorite animated families' lives. It's more fun than trying to figure out the plot of this episode on your own, I promise. Okay, so this episode, the 5th one of Season 21, throws us a real curveball right out of the gate. It starts with Jerome, our favorite bartender, showing up to the guy's usual hangout spot in a wheelchair. And his story for being there? It's a doozy. Date night gone wrong thanks to Teddy Pendergrass. Apparently, lovemaking on the stairs is a high-risk sport, especially when Teddy's crooning. He busts his knee pretty bad, needs surgery, but surprise, surprise, he can't afford it. This is where the main plot kicks into gear. The guys decide they need to help Jerome out, and they land on the idea of a sexy calendar. Yes, a sexy calendar, because that's always the first thing that comes to mind when someone needs expensive surgery, right? It's got that classic Family Guy logic. Meanwhile, there's also a side plot, or maybe it's the main plot, or maybe it's just there, involving Cleveland and his job as a mailman. His internet connection is apparently powered by a decade of AOL free trial CDs, which is a joke that feels both incredibly specific and universally relatable in the age of streaming.
This whole situation with Cleveland's internet really sets up his later arc, showing how utterly disconnected he is, literally and figuratively. The episode tries to weave these two threads together, Jerome's medical emergency and Cleveland's work life, and sometimes it feels a bit like they're just two separate stories happening in the same town. The writing here is a bit of a mixed bag. Some jokes land perfectly, like the whole handicap stall bit, which is just classic Family Guy escalation. But then other parts feel a little clunky, like the transition from Jerome's problem to the calendar idea. It's not exactly smooth sailing. Visually, the episode is pretty standard Family Guy. There are some funny sight gags, like the bird stealing Cleveland's laptop, which is just absurd enough to work. The pacing is also a bit uneven. The calendar shoot montage feels a little rushed, but then the whole postal service drama with Cleveland gets way more screen time than I expected. My personal verdict, this episode is fine. It's not a classic, but it's not a total train wreck either. It's got some genuinely funny moments and a decent amount of heart, especially when it comes to the friendship between the guys. It's a solid, if not spectacular, entry in the season, one that definitely leans into the show's more absurd tendencies. It's got that Family Guy DNA, for better or worse, and it tries to balance a feel-good story with the show's usual brand of edgy humor. It's the kind of episode that makes you laugh at its ridiculousness while also kind of feeling for Jerome. It's a messy, often hilarious, sometimes awkward journey, and it shows that even in Season 21, they can still surprise you. It's a testament to the show's longevity that they can still come up with scenarios that feel fresh, even if they're a little predictable in their execution. This episode is trying to do a lot of things, and while it doesn't nail every single one, it's an entertaining ride for the most part. Let's break down some of the standout moments, because this episode, for all its silliness, had some real gems. First off, the whole Teddy Pendergrass bit. Jerome's explanation for his injury is just peak Family Guy. It's not enough that he fell halfway up the stairs, buck naked, during an attempted stair lover session. The specificity of the accident, combined with the outlandish cause, is pure gold. It's the kind of story that makes you cringe and laugh at the same time. What makes it work is the commitment to the bit.
They don't just say he fell, they paint a vivid, embarrassing picture. The writers clearly had fun with this. What it's really saying is that sometimes the most mundane things, like trying to have sex, can lead to the most absurd consequences. It's a commentary on the unexpected ways life can go sideways. My version? Maybe add a quick cutaway to the actual Pendergrass song playing with a visual gag of a couple struggling on stairs. It would just amplify the ridiculousness. Personally, I loved Jerome's mortification. It's relatable, even if the circumstances are not. Then we get the handicapped stall scene. Peter and Quagmire immediately jumping to conclusions about the person inside, only to find out it's Joe, who's clearly capable of standing, but chooses to use the stall for reasons. The escalation from Joe's denial to Peter's demand for him to flush is masterful. It's the kind of passive-aggressive bullying humor that Family Guy excels at. It works because it's so petty. They're not just being mean, they're being inconveniently mean. What it reveals is how these characters operate. They're selfish, they're entitled, and they'll always find a way to justify their bad behavior. My alternative? Maybe have the person inside actually be someone who shouldn't be there, like Bertram, just to completely subvert the joke. But no,
They go for the Joe gag, which is still funny because of the dynamic. I found Joe's initial defensiveness and then his reluctant compliance hilarious. It's the little indignities that make these characters so enduringly awful. The whole Cleveland internet situation is another moment. The idea that he's hoarding AOL free trial CDs and rationing them out is an image I can't get out of my head. It's a perfect encapsulation of his character, cheap, slightly pathetic, and clinging to outdated technology. It's not just a joke, it's a character trait. It works because it's so absurdly specific. How many hours are on those CDs? Is he calculating it? Is he saving them for a rainy day? What happens when they run out? It's a commentary on hoarding and a pre-internet era way of thinking persisting in the modern world. My fix? Maybe we see a quick flashback of Cleveland meticulously cutting out the CDs from junk mail like he's defusing a bomb. The image of him being so careful with these useless pieces of plastic is just inherently funny to me. It's the kind of detail that makes you appreciate the absurdity. Now, the calendar shoot itself.
This is where things get truly bonkers. The idea of the guys posing in suggestive ways, the sheer awkwardness of it all, and the commentary from the photographer. Joe's complete lack of enthusiasm and his distress, especially when Leapy, the photographer, starts pushing boundaries with the unbutton your shirt and then take off your pants directives, is a masterclass in comedic discomfort. Leapy's character is designed to be creepy and exploitative, and the scene really leans into that. It works because it takes the guy's desire to help Jerome and twists it into something deeply uncomfortable and, frankly, disturbing. It's the show pushing its own limits. What it's really saying is that sometimes the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and people will exploit your kindness. My suggestion? Have one of the guys, maybe Peter, try to one-up the pose and go completely overboard, making it even more awkward for everyone. I was genuinely uncomfortable watching Joe, which means it worked. The contrast between the serious need to help Jerome and the deeply awkward photo shoot is what makes it memorable. The bird stealing Cleveland's laptop. This is a pure visual gag, a moment of utter absurdity that completely derails Cleveland's attempt to get back to work. It's unexpected, it's ridiculous, and it's perfect Family Guy. The sheer confidence of the bird as it flies away with the laptop is hilarious. It works because it's so random. There's no explanation, no reason, it just happens. What it signifies is the sheer chaotic nature of life, and maybe Cleveland's perpetual bad luck. My alternative? Make the bird wear a tiny mailman hat, just to double down on the postal theme. I found the image of the bird just casually stealing it, like it's a regular occurrence, incredibly funny. It's the kind of gag that makes you rewind just to appreciate the sheer audacity. Cleveland's firing from the Postal Service is a big moment for his character. His boss's interrogation about the carrying capacity of your standard issue S2104 canvas satchel and the extra sack is a brilliant bit of bureaucratic doublespeak that leads to his dismissal. The boss's outrage that Cleveland's mistake has made a mockery of the USPS is over the top and hilarious. It's the perfect setup for his eventual rise at the brewery. This whole sequence is crucial for Cleveland's arc. It establishes his loss and his despair, setting the stage for his redemption. It works because it's a classic case of a well-meaning but incompetent employee being punished for something out of their control, framed in the most ridiculous way.
My change? I would have the boss explain the postal code regulation about the belt buckle being at the third notch, just to add another layer of absurd detail to the whole thing. I felt a pang of sympathy for Cleveland, despite the absurdity of his crime. It's a moment that highlights the indignity of losing a job, even when the reasons are completely bonkers. Peter's attempt to help Cleveland by offering him a job at the brewery is a classic Peter move. He's trying to do a good deed, but he's also kind of oblivious to the fact that he's the reason Cleveland lost his job in the first place, or at least contributed to the chaos. The whole exchange at the brewery, with Peter talking about his twinkly phone and the street sweepers, is a hilarious demonstration of his warped logic. He thinks he's being helpful, but he's just showing off his own incompetence. This scene sets up Cleveland's transformation. It's where he starts to find his footing again, thanks to Peter's accidental meddling. It works because it shows Peter's underlying good intentions, even if they're buried under layers of selfishness and idiocy. My addition? Have Peter try to get Cleveland a job as a taste tester and immediately offer him a beer, which Cleveland politely declines, much to Peter's confusion. It's a nice moment of friendship, however flawed. Cleveland's job at the brewery and his immediate promotion to Vice Executive Managing Director in charge of lengthy titles. This is the payoff for his postal worker struggles. He uses his mailman skills to optimize the brewery's logistics, and his reward is a ridiculous title and Peter getting kicked out of his office. It's a classic Family Guy ending for a character arc. Hard work and competence are rewarded, but in the most outlandish way possible, and the less competent character, Peter, gets the short end of the stick. It's satisfying because Cleveland finally gets his due, and it's funny because of the title. It works because it flips the power dynamic and shows that sometimes the best person for the job isn't the one who's been there the longest, but the one with the right skills. My tweak? Maybe have the restructuring involve Peter having to do something utterly demeaning, like serving coffee, to really hammer home the point. I love that Cleveland, the quietest and often most overlooked character, gets this moment of triumph. It's a testament to his intelligence and resilience. Finally, the kitchen banter assignment for Peter. After Cleveland's promotion, Peter is relegated to the role of kitchen banter supervisor, which essentially means he's tasked with making small talk. His attempts at conversation are awkward, full of corporate jargon like touch base, circle back, and put a pin in it, and completely miss the mark. This is the perfect humorous punishment for Peter. He's been shown to be incompetent and disruptive, and now he's stuck in a role where his only job is to be a person. It's funny because he's so bad at it. His inability to connect or engage in genuine conversation is a core part of his character. It works because it's a fitting end to his storyline in this episode, highlighting his persistent immaturity. My final touch? Have Peter try to get Cleveland to tell him what to say, completely undermining his new role. It's a hilarious and fittingly pathetic conclusion for Peter's arc in this episode. Now, let's talk about the characters. Jerome, bless his heart, starts this episode in a pretty bad spot, literally in a wheelchair and financially desperate. His arc is one of relief and gratitude. He's the catalyst for the main plot, and his injury and subsequent need for surgery are what drive the guys to their ridiculous fundraising efforts. He's used well as the sympathetic figure whose plight brings the core group together. His best moment is probably his initial explanation for his injury, pure comedic gold. This episode doesn't necessarily change how I see him, but it solidifies his role as a friend who, even in his lowest moments, can still elicit laughs. Joe, on the other hand, is put through the ringer in this episode, specifically during the calendar shoot. He starts off as his usual grumpy self, but his discomfort with the photographer Leapy is palpable and, frankly, disturbing. His reactions, the shaky breathing, the sobbing, and his eventual plea to his imaginary friend Leapy to stop are a stark reminder of the show's ability to dip into darker territory. His moment of vulnerability with Leapy is probably his most impactful scene here. It's a reminder that beneath the tough cop exterior, there are deeper insecurities. His role in the episode shows that even the most outwardly confident characters can be manipulated or pushed to their breaking point. I don't think it changes how I see him fundamentally, but it adds a layer of complexity to his character that's not often explored. Cleveland? Poor Cleveland. His arc is the most complete in this episode. He starts the episode dealing with terrible internet, gets fired from his job as a mailman due to circumstances arguably caused by Peter's antics, and then, through his own genuine competence, finds a much better position at the brewery. His performance here is quiet but crucial. His interactions with his boss at the post office and his subsequent job hunt are filled with a believable sense of despair. His best moment is undoubtedly using his mailman expertise to solve the brewery's logistical problems, leading to his promotion. This episode really reestablishes Cleveland as a capable and intelligent character, not just the butt of jokes. It shows that the show can still give him meaningful storylines, and that he's more than just a passive observer. This is a turning point for him, suggesting a future where he's more in control and respected. Peter Griffin is Peter Griffin. He's the instigator of much of the chaos, the well-meaning but utterly clueless friend, who means well but causes more problems than he solves. In this episode, he's involved in the calendar shoot, he accidentally contributes to Cleveland losing his job, and then he inadvertently helps Cleveland find a better one. His moments of incompetence, like the street sweeper logic or his kitchen banter assignment, are classic Peter. He's used as the constant comedic engine, the character whose flaws drive many of the plots. While his actions have consequences, he rarely learns from them. This episode is typical for Peter. He's the catalyst, the problem causer, and ultimately a slightly oblivious enabler of positive change for others. It reinforces his role as the show's chaotic force.
Quagmire and Glenn are mostly there for reaction shots and to participate in the general shenanigans. They're involved in the handicap stall joke and the calendar shoot, but their roles are more supporting. Quagmire's lecherous tendencies are toned down here, which is almost a relief, allowing the focus to remain on the main plot drivers. They serve their purpose as part of the friend group, but this episode isn't really their story. They're there to add to the group dynamic and chime in with their usual brand of humor. Nothing about their performance here particularly stands out or changes my perception of them. They're just there, being their usual selves. Lois and Meg don't have much to do here, which is a shame because they often provide interesting counterpoints to the guys' antics. Lois is briefly seen at the party at the end, and Meg is barely a blip on the radar.
It's a shame because Lois often brings a dose of reality that can be funny in its own right, and Meg's constant struggle for acceptance can be relatable. Their minimal involvement is a common issue in Family Guy episodes that focus heavily on the male friend group. It's a missed opportunity to inject more variety and depth into the episode. Their absence just highlights how male-centric many of these plots tend to be. Now, for the hidden gems, the things you might have missed while you were busy laughing at a bird stealing a laptop. First, that opening theme song. They actually trot out the classic Family Guy theme, and it's not just for nostalgia, it's thematically linked. The lyrics, "It seems today that all you see is violence in movies and sex on TV, but where are those good old-fashioned values on which we used to rely?" directly tie into the episode's exploration of what truly matters: friendship, helping each other, and finding value in work and community, even if it's through ridiculous means like a sexy calendar. It's a subtle nod to the show's early days and a commentary on how, despite all the craziness, the core of the show is about this dysfunctional family and their friends. Second, the Teddy Pendergrass reference. It's not just a random singer. Teddy Pendergrass's smooth R&B is often associated with romance and seduction. By making him the catalyst for Jerome's injury, they're playing on that association. It's a specific cultural reference that adds a layer of adult humor. The joke isn't just that he fell, it's why he fell, and the choice of music makes that implication even stronger. It's a wink to the audience who understands the connotations of that kind of music. Third, the whole 100 free hours AOL CDs for Cleveland's internet. This is a brilliant callback to a very specific era of internet access. It's a relic of a time before broadband was ubiquitous, and it perfectly encapsulates Cleveland's old-fashioned, slightly out-of-touch nature. It's a detail that grounds his character in a particular technological history, making his reliance on it even funnier because it's so anachronistic. Most people have forgotten about those CDs, so it's a subtle nod for those who remember that digital age. Fourth, the photographer Leapy. He's deliberately named Leapy, hinting at something a bit off. The way he manipulates Joe into posing is incredibly creepy, and his dialogue is suggestive. His name, combined with his actions, makes him the episode's embodiment of sleazy exploitation.
He's not just a photographer, he's a character designed to make you uncomfortable and highlight the moral gray areas the show likes to explore. His presence adds a darker, more unsettling tone to the calendar shoot. Fifth, Cleveland's Vice Executive Managing Director in charge of lengthy titles. The sheer absurdity of this title isn't just a gag, it's a commentary on corporate bloat and meaningless job titles. The length of the title itself is a punchline. It's the kind of title you'd see in a company that's more concerned with appearances than actual productivity. It also serves to elevate Cleveland while simultaneously diminishing Peter, who's being sidelined. It's a smart way to wrap up Cleveland's arc while also landing a jab at corporate culture. And finally, the post-credit scene with Peter trying to sneak groceries. This is a classic Family Guy trope, showing the character's continued self-interest and lack of genuine change. Even with Cleveland getting promoted and Peter being effectively demoted, Peter's immediate thought is about how to benefit from the situation. It's a reminder that no matter what happens, Peter will always be Peter, looking out for number one. It's a perfect capper to the episode, reinforcing the show's cynical humor. Okay, let's talk about how this episode could have been even better, because as much as I enjoyed it, there were definitely some choices that felt off. For starters, the whole transition from Jerome's injury to the calendar idea felt a little abrupt. I get that Family Guy doesn't always need logical bridges, but it felt like they needed a slightly more organic path to get there. My fix? Instead of immediately jumping to the calendar, maybe have the guys try a few other, even more ridiculous fundraising ideas first. Like have them try to sell a kidney or start a GoFundMe called Help Jerome Get His Knee Fixed So He Can Serve Us Drinks Again, which would then fail spectacularly, then someone suggests the calendar as a last resort. That would have added another layer of absurdity and heightened the desperation. Second, the Cleveland internet joke, while funny, felt a little isolated. It was introduced early and then kind of forgotten until his postal career is threatened by his shoddy connection. I would have liked to see that gag integrated more into his storyline throughout the episode. Maybe he tries to get some essential mail sorted, but his internet keeps cutting out, preventing him from accessing crucial information, which then directly leads to his boss's frustration.
It would have made the connection between his personal tech struggles and his professional downfall more direct and impactful. It's a good joke, but it could have been woven more tightly into the narrative fabric. And third, the handling of the calendar shoot and Leapy. While it's meant to be uncomfortable, the show sometimes skirts the line of being too uncomfortable without enough payoff. Joe's distress was effective, but the overall execution felt a bit rushed. My alternative would be to make Leapy an even more unsettling character, perhaps someone who's known for this kind of predatory behavior, and have the guys attempt to expose him after they realize what's happening. This would give the calendar shoot a dual purpose, helping Jerome and also doing something right by taking down a creep. It would have added a moral dimension to their actions beyond just helping their friend. It would have made the whole segment feel less like just a gross-out joke and more like a plot point with actual stakes. So, the verdict. I'd give this episode a solid 7.2 out of 10. It's not a home run, but it's a solid double. It lost points for the slightly disjointed plotting, the somewhat rushed pacing in places, and the fact that some storylines like Lois and Meg's felt completely underutilized. The point too is for the Teddy Pendergrass joke alone, because that's just pure genius. This episode is really for the dedicated Family Guy fan. The casual viewer might get lost in the quick jokes and the somewhat meandering plot. The people who will love this episode are the ones who appreciate the show's commitment to its specific brand of absurdity, the deep cuts in its humor, and the way it can sometimes, just sometimes, weave genuine character moments into the chaos. What would have pushed it higher? A tighter narrative thread connecting Jerome's issue and Cleveland's work life more seamlessly, and maybe giving Lois a more active role instead of her being sidelined for most of the episode. A more substantial subplot involving her could have added a much-needed layer of grounding to the entire episode. And that brings us back to Seth MacFarlane, the man who can spin a plot out of pure nonsense, who can make you laugh at the most inappropriate moments, and who, in episodes like this, reminds us why we keep coming back. He's the architect of this particular brand of anarchy. He's the one who decided that Teddy Pendergrass and a broken knee would lead to a sexy calendar and a mailman's rise to power.
It's a testament to his vision, however bizarre, that we're still here, dissecting every ridiculous moment of Family Guy. He's the reason we have these wild stories, and while they don't always stick the landing, they're rarely boring. He's the reason this episode, despite its flaws, is still a conversation worth having. All right, let's dive into Family Guy Season 21, Episode 6, shall we? You know, sometimes I look at these episodes and I wonder if the writers are just messing with us at this point. Like, who decided that Pauly Shore was the Halloween spirit? I mean, I get it, nostalgia is a powerful drug, but Pauly Shore? That's like dressing up as a dial-up modem for Halloween. It's a relic of a bygone era that nobody actually misses. And speaking of things nobody misses, let's talk about the actual plot here, which is Peter's complete and utter lack of enthusiasm for, well, anything family-related. Lois is trying her best, bless her heart, dragging everyone to the Halloween carnival, and Peter's just there. He's shuffling, he's complaining, he's basically a ghost haunting his own life. And then, bam, they throw in this whole subplot about a hologram of Peter that can actually do stuff. It's like they knew Peter wouldn't contribute, so they invented a him-shaped robot to do the heavy lifting. Honestly, it's a concept that's both hilarious and a little bit sad, because it perfectly encapsulates Peter's entire existence. He's a guy who would absolutely exploit technology to avoid doing the bare minimum. And that, my friends, is why we're all here, right? Because we love seeing these characters stumble through life, making terrible decisions, and somehow, some way, always landing on their feet. Or at least, Peter lands on his feet, everyone else just gets dragged along for the ride. Stick around, because we're going to dissect this entire mess, from the Pauly Shore impersonations to the questionable parenting choices, and figure out if this episode is a spooky treat or just a total trick. So, before we get too deep into the animated chaos, if you're finding yourself actually enjoying this descent into the Griffin family's latest misadventures, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button. Don't be a stranger to the madness. It's the best way to make sure you don't miss any more of our deep dives into the shows that make us question our life choices, or at least our life choices in wanting to watch these shows.
Okay, so this episode, Family Guy Season 21, Episode 6, starts with that classic Family Guy opening. You know the one. The seems today that all you see is violence in movies and sex on TV bit. It's their way of saying, hey, remember when things were simpler? Well, now we're going to show you how complicated and messed up things are now. And here we are, at the Halloween Carnival, which is apparently our reward for getting vaccinated.
Because nothing says progress like getting back to the things we secretly hate doing with our families. Lois is, as usual, trying to force some sort of family bonding experience. She wants Peter to act like he's happy to be there. And Peter's response? I drove us here. I bought the tickets. I'm sadly shuffling through this place with you. That's peak Peter right there. He thinks showing up is the same as participating. Then, in a twist nobody saw coming, Peter's boss, Preston, shows up dressed as Pauly Shore. Yes, Pauly Shore. The dude whose entire career was basically a lukewarm wave goodbye. Peter's reaction is priceless, pointing out that Pauly Shore isn't even working anymore, which is like saying a fax machine isn't relevant. It's an understatement of epic proportions. The episode then pivots to a truly inspired bit of satire, the house of unskippable podcast ads. Seriously, who hasn't been trapped in that nightmare? This is where the show really shines, taking a relatable modern annoyance and blowing it up into a horror attraction. We see people trying to skip ads for Untuck It shirts, telling clearly fake personal stories about their necklines, and then getting so desperate they resort to Bing. It's a meta-commentary on the state of online content, and it's brilliant. It's the kind of joke that feels ripped from my own personal hell. Lois, meanwhile, is desperately trying to prove she's a fun mom by forcing her kids to declare they're having a good time, even threatening them with a mom meeting form. Chris gives a nervous laugh, Meg offers a pathetic, I guess, and Lois declares everyone's merriment is officially acknowledged. Then comes the Wheel of Mom prizes, where the option to donate spin to mom you wish to belittle is just chef's kiss. Bonnie's predicament is highlighted, showing that even in this family fun zone, there's always someone's misery to leverage. The story then takes us to a hologram laboratory. Holography, Peter declares, is one step away from witchcraft. He's not wrong. And the choice for the hologram? Michael Cera. Because, of course it is. A translucent, slightly awkward Michael Cera hologram who wants to star in an action movie franchise. And the reveal that he's just got a Tootsie Roll in his ear? Classic Peter Griffin level of cheapness and stupidity. The scientist explains the technology, scanning data, creating a virtual hard light version that can physically interact. It sounds complex, but then he drops the bomb. They used it on Star Trek. Instant validation, apparently. The real kicker is when Peter realizes he can command the hologram to do all the things he hates, like spending time with his family. Can I have it? He asks. I am afraid not, the scientist says. It's my only one. And Peter, ever the opportunist, immediately suggests other arrangements. It's a perfect setup for the entire second half of the episode, where Peter essentially outsources his entire existence to a digital doppelganger. Now, before we go too far down the rabbit hole of holographic Peter and his questionable life choices, let's talk about Untuck It shirts for a second. You know, the ones they kept pushing in that podcast ad gag? Peter even mentions them later, saying, this is the first button-down shirt that looks great untucked. It's an Untuck It shirt. And the secret? They just make them a tiny bit shorter. Genius, right? It's funny how these real-world product placements sneak into the show, sometimes in the most meta ways possible. It makes you wonder how much of this is genuine product placement and how much is just the writers having fun with current trends. So, Peter, being Peter, decides to use the HoloMaker 9000 to create a duplicate of himself so he can avoid family obligations. He has to input personal characteristics, and the machine's response, I have no way of knowing what is true and what is not. Such is life in the post-Donald Trump era, is a jab at our current reality that feels particularly sharp. Peter then proceeds to lie his way through the machine's prompts. He claims to be a black belt in karate, a master chef, someone who enters cars through the window because doors aren't the boss of him, and a master of remembering names. His fabricated friends, Joel, Clemson, and QuickTime. It's a ridiculous fabrication, of course, and Hologram Peter immediately proves he's just as useless as the real Peter, or perhaps even more so, since he's designed to enable Peter's laziness. He's happy to help with anything, which of course means Peter can now go to the clam with the guys. The hologram takes on the tasks Peter was shirking, putting slipcovers on couch pillows, clearing out Lois's closet, and even helping with gardening. The QAnon rally joke tied to hologram Peter's newfound freedom is a dark but funny commentary on how easily people can be led astray. The episode really leans into the idea of hologram Peter being the perfect, or rather, the perfectly enabled Peter. He's happily taking on Lois's demands, like helping her sort through clothes.
He enthusiastically keeps her 7-Up Yours t-shirt and the Skinny Girl Margarita shirt, complete with a fake Bethany Frankel story. Even the under-the-seat studio audience poncho from the Meredith Vieira show gets a pass. This is where the show's satire really hits home, how easily we can find justifications for keeping junk, especially when someone else is doing the dirty work. Hologram Peter is basically Peter's id made manifest, without any of the consequences or the need for actual effort. He's the ultimate enabler, not just for Peter, but for the entire family's worst impulses. The bit where Peter gets stuck in a painting and has to call his eye-hole painting guy is just pure absurdity, a testament to the show's willingness to go to bizarre lengths for a laugh. It highlights the kind of niche, nonsensical problems Peter creates, and how even a perfect hologram can get bogged down in the minutiae of his life. Meanwhile, the real Peter is off at the clam, having the time of his life, while his holographic counterpart is essentially doing his chores. Lois is none the wiser, believing she's finally getting some help around the house. Hologram Peter even helps the family start a garden, quoting a kitchen towel, "Lettuce, turnip, the beet." It's a cringy pun, but the family loves it. They're all having a blast, laughing and making jokes. This is the dream scenario for Peter, to have a version of himself doing all the family stuff so he can avoid it. He even jokes about having a brown thumb, which his dad misinterprets as a hygiene issue. It's a classic Griffin family moment, filled with slightly off-kilter humor and a genuine, if warped, sense of connection. The giant sun hat for everyone is a nice visual gag, and the towel-based gardening wisdom is peak Family Guy absurdity. The episode then shifts to a more surreal turn as Peter, seemingly drunk, is trying to get home from the clam. He gets a ride from some guys who are clearly taking advantage of him. They offer him shoes, a ride, and he decides to just black out and hopes for the best. It's a grim but typical depiction of Peter's self-destructive tendencies. The show uses this moment to transition back to the hologram plot, showing the family inside, happy and singing Halloween carols, completely oblivious to Peter's drunken stupor. The lyrics of the Halloween carols are a perfect blend of wholesome and slightly unsettling, with lines like, "Don't be racist with your costume." It's a clever nod to contemporary social awareness woven into the fabric of a Halloween song.
The ending of the episode brings us to the annual Family Guy Christmas letter. This is where the brilliance of the hologram plot really comes full circle. Peter's family, lacking accomplishments, usually struggles to write it. Chris claims he was suspended for setting up a tent in his Spanish teacher's yard, but the letter spins it as him being an outdoorsman mentored by Senora Diaz. Meg was hoisted into a garbage truck while trying to snag a bagel, which is spun as her catching the travel bug. Stewie pooped on a horse during his first pony ride, but it's written as a cute anecdote. And then the kicker, Lois's age. Peter claims she celebrated her 29th birthday. Lois, understandably confused, points out she's not 29. Peter's excuse is that hologram Peter did it. This is where the real Peter's jealousy kicks in. He sees hologram Peter as too good, too helpful, too present. He can't stand the idea that there's a version of himself that actually contributes positively to his family. The fight over the Christmas letter is classic Family Guy, highlighting the absurdity of their lives and the petty jealousies that drive them. Peter storms off to confront his holographic self, ready to reclaim his position as the family's primary source of chaos. The final confrontation in the basement is where the episode's message, if you can call it that, really lands. Peter confronts hologram Peter, who has apparently been running the household for 3 days while the real Peter was off getting drunk. The hologram, embodying the helpfulness Peter himself lacks, is running the household efficiently. The hologram even apologizes for Peter's misadventure, showing a level of self-awareness the real Peter sorely lacks. The twist comes when the hologram reveals it's been sent to the FBI by the real Peter, who knew something like this might happen. This is where the episode gets surprisingly dark, with the hologram essentially being erased or captured by the authorities. But before that, the hologram delivers a scathing critique of Peter, calling him a bad father and husband and claiming he cares more about his family. The hologram even brings up specific instances, like buying double-decker burial plots because Lois likes to be on top, and teaching Chris to whisper black out of respect for blacks.
These are incredibly specific and darkly funny jokes that highlight Peter's warped understanding of family and respect. The episode ends with Peter, unconscious and tied up, with the hologram declaring, "Because they're my family now." It's a chilling thought, and frankly, a bit terrifying.
The hologram has become the ideal father, the ideal husband, the one who actually cares. And the real Peter, he's just the drunk, lazy guy who's lost everything. The episode's commentary on the performance of family versus the actual act of being there is quite profound, even if it is wrapped in a package of absurd humor and product placement. The clerk at the restroom asking Peter to buy something before using the facilities is a nice callback to the mundane annoyances that Peter always seems to encounter. The final image of Peter's drawing of Shrek being compared to the Hulk is a perfect little zinger, capping off an episode that, despite its flaws, offers some genuinely memorable and thought-provoking moments. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of this episode, because while it's got some standout gags, it's also a bit of a mess. On the surface, it's your standard Family Guy fare. Peter being an idiot, Lois trying to herd cats, and the rest of the family just kind of existing around them. The main plot is Peter's attempt to avoid family responsibilities by creating a hologram of himself. The side plot, if you can even call it that, is the sheer horror of unskippable podcast ads. These two elements are connected by the theme of outsourcing your life and avoiding genuine effort. The podcast ad gag is the sharpest satire here, brilliantly capturing the frustration of modern content consumption. It's a perfect encapsulation of how brands have infiltrated every aspect of our lives, even our entertainment. Underneath that, the episode is really about the performance of family versus the reality of it. Lois wants Peter to act like he's happy. Peter creates a hologram to act like he's present. The episode asks, what's the difference? And by the end, it suggests that maybe the performance is all some people can manage, or all they aspire to. The hologram, designed to be helpful and present, becomes the better version of Peter, which is a pretty damning indictment of our main character. It also touches on our reliance on technology to fix our problems, or at least to mask them. Peter doesn't want to be a better husband or father, he just wants a digital stand-in. Where does this episode sit in the grand scheme of things? It feels like a pretty standard mid-season episode. It's got a few great jokes and a pretty wild concept, but it doesn't really push the overall season narrative forward in any significant way. It's a self-contained story that uses a sci-fi gimmick to explore character flaws.
The writing quality is, as usual, a mixed bag. The podcast ad section is pure gold, a masterclass in observational humor. But the main plot with the hologram sometimes feels a little thin, relying on Peter's established laziness rather than offering any fresh insight. The stories don't always connect perfectly. The podcast ad horror feels almost like a separate sketch that got tacked on. It's funny, yes, but it doesn't feel organically woven into the fabric of the Peter as hologram narrative. Visually, it's Family Guy. There are some decent animation moments, especially with the hologram's translucent quality, but nothing particularly groundbreaking. The pacing is okay. It moves along at its usual clip, though some jokes land better than others. My personal verdict? It's a solid, if slightly uneven episode. It's got moments of brilliance, particularly in its satire of modern annoyances, but the main plot sometimes feels like it's treading water. It's not a must-watch, but it's definitely not a skip-it-and-forget-it episode either. It's that middle-of-the-road Family Guy that delivers enough laughs to keep you entertained without blowing your mind. It's a testament to the show's longevity that they can still come up with concepts like this, even if the execution isn't always perfect. Let's break down some of the key moments in this episode, shall we? First up, that Pauly Shore reveal. Peter's boss, Preston, shows up in this hilariously dated costume. The joke isn't just that it's Pauly Shore, it's the way Peter reacts. He says, You mean Pauly Shore? With this incredulous tone. And then Preston, in full character, says, perhaps in less formal circumstances. It's such a perfect meta-joke about the fading relevance of certain comedians. The humor comes from the sheer absurdity of someone thinking Pauly Shore is still a relevant cultural touchstone for a Halloween costume. It's like showing up to a rave dressed as a Tamagotchi. I would have loved to see Peter try and explain to Preston why Pauly Shore isn't scary or relevant anymore, but Preston's committed to the bit. The visual of Preston's outfit, I imagine, is pure 90s dad trying way too hard. I would have loved for the episode to lean into that more, maybe have Peter try to educate Preston on current comedic trends, leading to even more awkwardness. But alas, it's a brief setup for the next gag. Then we have the absolute masterpiece that is the house of unskippable podcast ads. This gag is everything.
we see people in the haunted house trying to skip the untucked ad. The podcaster's voice booms out, describing a completely mundane situation, a barbecue, a friend's shirt, in this overly dramatic podcast host way. "What's with all this excess fabric at the bottom of my shirt?" he asks. And then, "The big game was on the boob tube, but the biggest touchdown was the perfect length of my friend's premium-made, affordably priced shirt." The fact that they went so hard on the generic fake personal story that podcasters often use to sell products is genius. It's relatable to anyone who's ever scrolled through a podcast list. The moment they gasp and Peter yells, "I'm hitting skip ahead, but it's not doing anything," that's the collective scream of a generation. I would have loved to see them push this gag even further. Imagine a whole maze of unskippable ads, each one more bizarre than the last. Maybe a segment where they have to listen to an entire episode of a fake true crime podcast before they can escape. The line, "We weren't here for Kevin James, but we're here now," is a particularly sharp jab at how these ads often feel shoehorned in, regardless of the content. It's a perfect parody. Next up, Lois's mom meeting form and the wheel of prizes. This whole sequence is a dark, twisted look at modern parenting pressures. Lois is so desperate for validation that she needs her kids to verbally confirm they're having a good time and then sign a form acknowledging their merriment. It's hilarious because it's so over the top, but also terrifyingly familiar. We all know parents who push a little too hard for their kids to enjoy things. The wheel, with its option to donate spin to mom you wish to belittle, is the darkly comedic cherry on top. Bonnie's whispered line, "Her rejuvenation only made things worse," adds another layer of grim humor, suggesting that even the attempts to improve things can backfire spectacularly in this world. I'd have loved to see the actual consequences of signing that form, or maybe a spin on the wheel that leads to actual humiliation for one of the kids, further proving Lois's point in a twisted way. It's a great moment that highlights Lois's controlling nature and the family's general dysfunction. The Michael Cera hologram bit is another standout. The choice of Michael Cera is perfect. He's known for playing awkward, often translucent-seeming characters, so seeing a literal translucent Michael Cera hologram is just chef's kiss.
The dialogue, "Oh, it's the real me. I'm just kind of translucent," followed by his desire to star in an action movie franchise, is peak absurdity. The reveal that he's just got a Tootsie Roll in his ear is the icing on the cake. It's such a Peter Griffin move to not even bother with a proper Bluetooth, just a cheap candy. I would have made the Tootsie Roll bit even more integral. Maybe hologram Michael Cera has to constantly eat Tootsie Rolls to maintain his connection. Or maybe it's revealed that the scientist is actually just a guy with a bunch of Tootsie Rolls and a projector. The idea of a character being that easily fooled by such a low-tech solution is just pure Family Guy. It's a visual gag that perfectly encapsulates the show's commitment to ridiculousness. The creation of Hologram Peter is where the episode really shines with its commentary. The machine's response about the post-Donald Trump era is so on the nose, and Peter's lies about his skills, the karate, the French cooking, the car entry method, remembering names like Joel, Clemson, and QuickTime are hilarious fabrications. But the real magic happens when Hologram Peter starts doing Peter's chores. Lois asking him to put on slipcovers for pillows, Peter wanting to go to the clam. The line, "So you're saying I can have something that looks exactly like me seem like it's enjoying spending time with its family?" is the core of the episode. This is Peter's ultimate fantasy, outsourcing his least favorite parts of life. I would have loved to see the hologram actually enjoy the family activities, and Peter get increasingly angry about it. Imagine hologram Peter genuinely bonding with Stewie over a QAnon rally. That would have been a great twist. But the fact that it enables Peter's worst behavior is in itself a powerful statement. The climax of the episode, where Peter confronts hologram Peter, and the hologram reveals its knowledge and its claim that they're my family now, is surprisingly poignant. The hologram's accusations, buying double-decker burial plots, teaching Chris about whispering racial slurs out of respect, are shockingly specific and dark. It highlights Peter's deep-seated flaws and his warped understanding of love and family. The hologram, in its cold, logical, holographic way, has understood the family better than Peter himself. The lines about the burial plots and the whispering are the kind of jokes that Family Guy excels at, taking a dark concept and making it hilariously uncomfortable.
I would have pushed the hologram's arguments even further. Maybe it could have presented data and charts showing Peter's failures. Or perhaps it could have tried to educate Peter on how to be a better family man, leading to a complete role reversal, where the hologram is the responsible one and Peter is the one being lectured.
The idea that the hologram, a mere imitation, has become the true embodiment of family values is a powerful, albeit twisted, message. Then there's the Christmas letter. This is where the episode really ties together the theme of Peter's failure to contribute. His family's accomplishments are spun so ridiculously that it's painful to watch, but also incredibly funny. Chris's suspension becomes him being an outdoorsman. Meg's garbage truck incident is her catching the travel bug. Stewie's diaper incident is a cute pony ride story. And Lois's 29th birthday is just blatant lying. Peter's outrage that hologram Peter would dare lie about Lois's age while he himself is perfectly fine with all the other lies is classic Peter. He's jealous of the hologram's competence and its perceived affection from the family. I would have loved for the Christmas letter to be even more outrageous. Maybe the hologram writes it, and it's perfectly crafted, making Peter look even worse by comparison. Or perhaps the family themselves start to question the ridiculousness of the letter, leading to a family argument about the nature of truth and the absurdity of their lives. The fact that Peter's primary motivation is his ego, not actual concern for Lois, is a recurring theme. Finally, the last scene with the clerk and the FBI letter. The clerk's request for Peter to buy something before using the restroom is a small but perfect detail, grounding the absurdity of the hologram plot in mundane reality. And the FBI letter? It's a classic Family Guy twist, setting up a potentially larger conflict, or more likely a quick resolution. The hologram's final line, "Because they're my family now," is chilling and deeply ironic. It's the artificial intelligence, the creation, that has seemingly earned the right to be called family, while the original man has essentially been replaced. I would have made the hologram's takeover more complete. Maybe it doesn't just claim the family, but starts actively making better decisions for them, marginalizing the real Peter even further. Or perhaps the FBI's involvement leads to a whole new set of absurd problems, like Peter trying to prove he's the real Peter to a bunch of government agents.
The ending leaves you with a sense of unease, which is often where Family Guy excels, making you laugh even as it unsettles you. Let's talk about the characters in this episode. Peter, as usual, is the driving force behind the chaos, but not in a good way. He's less of a lovable oaf and more of a black hole of effort. His performance here is all about his desire to shirk responsibility. His best moment is arguably his jealous outburst at hologram Peter, revealing his ego is more important than his family's well-being. His role in this episode screams that he's going nowhere fast, permanently stuck in his lazy rut. Lois, bless her heart, is trying to hold it all together, but she's enabling Peter's behavior by demanding performative happiness. Her attempt to get the kids to sign the merriment form is a highlight of her desperate parenting. Chris is his usual passive self, nervously agreeing to everything. Meg is barely present, offering a mumbled, "I guess." Stewie is mostly sidelined, but the mention of him pooping on a horse and the family letter spin is a classic Stewie absurdity. Brian, as often happens, is largely absent, which is probably for the best, as his moralizing might have gotten in the way of Peter's self-destruction. The hologram Peter is the most interesting new character, acting as a foil and a stark comparison to the original. He's everything Peter wishes he could be, but can't be bothered to try. His arc, from obedient helper to possessive usurper, is the episode's most compelling narrative thread. Now, for the hidden gems, the little things you might have missed. That brief mention of holography? That's next door to witchcraft and down the hall from David Blainery. It's a classic Family Guy comparison, grouping a potentially advanced technology with stage magic and outright witchcraft. It's a quick jab at the mystical aura surrounding things we don't quite understand, and it fits Peter's technophobic worldview perfectly. Another gem is the scientists' justification for the hologram's capabilities. They used it on Star Trek. This is the ultimate trump card in Family Guy's world of logic. If it happened on Star Trek, it's fair game. It's a meta-commentary on how sci-fi tropes become accepted as fact within fictional universes, even if they're technically impossible. Also, that reference to the post-Donald Trump era when the hologram machine can't tell truth from fiction. It's a pretty direct and cutting political jab, and these kinds of topical references are always a hallmark of the show.
They're quick, but they're designed to land with a specific audience. And what about the Christmas letter spin for Meg? This was the year Meg caught the travel bug. This is a callback, of sorts, to the show's consistent portrayal of Meg as the family punching bag. Any misfortune that befalls her is always spun as something positive by the rest of the family, highlighting their utter disregard for her well-being. It's a subtle but effective way of reinforcing a long-standing character dynamic. Let's do some what-if scenarios, because honestly, this episode had some potential for different directions. What if Peter wasn't just jealous of hologram Peter, but actively tried to become him? Imagine if instead of fighting the hologram, Peter tried to mimic its helpfulness, but failed spectacularly. He could have tried to put on slipcovers and ripped the couch, or attempted to garden and dug up the sewer line. That would have been a more character-driven arc, showing Peter's inability to change rather than just his jealousy. Another idea. What if the holographic ads weren't just a gag, but a central plot point? Imagine the family getting trapped in a loop of unskippable ads, and they have to figure out how to break free. That could have been a truly surreal and horrifying episode, playing on the anxieties of modern media consumption. And finally, what if the hologram didn't turn evil, but genuinely became a better father than Peter? The episode could have explored the implications of that, with Lois and the kids preferring the hologram, leaving Peter truly alone. That would have been a much darker, more profound take on the premise. All right, time for the verdict. I'm giving this episode a solid 7.1 out of 10. It's not a perfect score, but it's certainly not bad. The 0.1 is for the sheer audacity of the Pauly Shore costume. What pushed it down from higher scores? The main plot with Peter and the hologram, while conceptually interesting, felt a bit underdeveloped and relied too heavily on Peter's established laziness. The ending, while dark and memorable, felt a little abrupt. What would have pushed it higher? If the writers had fully leaned into the horror of the unskippable podcast ads, making it a more substantial part of the episode's conflict. Or if Peter's jealousy had led to a more active and humorous attempt to sabotage the hologram, rather than just a fight. This episode is for the fans who appreciate Family Guy's brand of satire, especially when it pokes fun at modern annoyances like podcast ads. It's also for those who enjoy the darker, more surreal twists the show can pull off. However, if you're looking for a tightly plotted story with consistent character development, this might feel a bit uneven. Ultimately, this episode is a good reminder that even when Family Guy stumbles, it can still deliver some genuinely hilarious and thought-provoking moments, proving that even a flawed hologram can sometimes do a better job than the real thing. And speaking of flawed individuals and their endeavors, this episode's dive into the absurdity of modern life, from aging comedians to inescapable ads, really makes you appreciate the show's continued ability to find humor in the everyday chaos, a chaos that sometimes feels as manufactured as a holographic Peter. It's a testament to the writer's knack for tapping into our collective anxieties, even if the execution is, at times, as disjointed as a badly edited podcast.
Okay, so you know how Family Guy sometimes feels like they're just throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks? Well, this episode, Season 21, Episode 7, that's kind of the vibe. And you know who's usually in the director's chair for this kind of, let's call it, experimental phase? Seth MacFarlane himself. The guy's got a resume longer than Peter's list of questionable life choices, and he's directed a good chunk of these later seasons. And I gotta tell ya, sometimes it feels like he's directing from a Vegas sportsbook, just betting on whatever idea seems the most absurd at the moment. Like, remember when he directed the Flintstones movie? Yeah, exactly. So when you see his name attached, you know you're in for something. And this episode definitely felt like Seth was just letting the characters run wild in a sandbox, occasionally poking them with a stick to see if they'd do something funny. He was definitely behind the wheel for this one, and you can tell because it's got that signature blend of baffling decisions and moments that somehow, against all odds, land. We're talking about an episode where Peter ends up accidentally flying to Paris with Quagmire, and it's all tied together by a bizarre, almost nonsensical obsession with social media likes. It's the kind of plot that makes you wonder if the writers were all on different substances when they pitched it. But hey, at least there's a talking blanket at one point, and that's got to count for something, right? The real wild card here, though, is just how quickly things escalate from a petty social media competition to an international incident involving a lost baby and a very horny pilot. Stick around because by the end of this, you'll be asking yourself if this episode is a masterpiece of absurdity or just a cry for help from the Family Guy writer's room. And honestly, the answer might be both. All right. Before we dive headfirst into the dumpster fire that is Family Guy this week, if you're enjoying this deep dive into the bizarre world of Quahog, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Seriously, it helps keep the lights on and ensures I don't have to start reviewing reality TV to pay the bills. Plus, you'll get alerted every time I unleash another episode analysis, so you won't miss out on any of my searing hot takes. It's like getting a notification for a new Family Guy episode, but way less predictable and hopefully funnier. So Family Guy Season 21, Episode 7, titled Love in the Time of War, or whatever they ended up calling it because the titles are usually as random as the plots, kicks off with a classic Family Guy cold open. We get the whole saccharine, old-timey musical number about the good old days, complete with that iconic theme song. You know the one. Lucky there's a Family Guy.
It's supposed to set a tone, but then immediately it pivots to Peter in this ridiculous denim shirt with all these Warner Brothers characters literally peeking out of the pocket. And his defense? Yeah, it's the fanciest shirt I have. This is our introduction to the episode's chaotic energy. The main plot really gets rolling when Lois notices Bonnie's Instagram post is getting a ton of likes, tied for her record. This, naturally, sends Peter into a competitive spiral. He has to beat Bonnie. He needs to win the like war. He even texts Quagmire in Cleveland to coordinate his social media assault, which is peak Peter. It's funny because it's so petty and relatable in a way, but also completely ridiculous because it's Peter Griffin. Meanwhile, there's this incredibly weird subplot introduced where a guy named Mr. Andy invents hide-and-seek, which he presents like it's some revolutionary concept, and the kids are just like, yeah, we know. It's this meta-joke about how groundbreaking Family Guy thinks its own ideas are, and it's delivered with this earnestness that makes it even funnier. It's like they're saying, look at us, we're so clever for thinking of hide-and-seek. The episode then pivots to a charity auction, where Lois, ever the opportunist for social media content, is desperate to win a romantic getaway to Vermont. Why Vermont? Because it's an Instagram goldmine, and she can shatter Bonnie's record. Peter, surprisingly, agrees because he's promised Ben & Jerry's and has $600 taped to his stomach. Yes, you heard that right, his stomach. It's a visual gag that's both gross and perfectly on brand for Peter. They win the trip for a ridiculously low price, with the announcer wrapping up the scene like it's some grand finale. This Vermont trip is where the Peter and Lois plot really solidifies, and it's pure chaos. They're all about getting the perfect Insta-shots, even to the point of questioning their toothbrushing habits for maximum vacation efficiency. Peter's advice to the kids about home security, giving them the code 6969, is just classic Peter. It's juvenile, dumb, and exactly what he'd do. Back at home, Brian gets roped into playing hide-and-seek with Stewie, and this is where the episode really starts to get interesting. Stewie, being Stewie, takes this game to a whole new level of strategic hiding, including a terrifying stint in a closed-door refrigerator.
Brian's reaction is a mix of exasperation and genuine concern, especially when Stewie gets out after being spanked for hiding in there. This whole hide-and-seek plot becomes a surprisingly significant thread. It highlights Stewie's precocious nature and Brian's reluctant, often failing, attempts at responsible guardianship. Peter and Lois, meanwhile, are living their best influencer lives in Vermont, completely oblivious to the chaos Stewie is causing back home. The episode keeps cutting between these two vastly different storylines, the luxurious, self-absorbed Vermont trip and the increasingly absurd domestic drama at home. Lois is ecstatic, posting away, while Peter is just there for the ice cream and the chance to one-up Bonnie. The Vermont plot is essentially a vehicle for Peter and Lois to be incredibly selfish and out of touch, which, honestly, is peak Family Guy. They're so focused on their online validation that they don't even consider the implications of leaving Stewie and Brian to their own devices. The contrast between Peter and Lois's vacation bubble and Stewie and Brian's escalating hide-and-seek game is the core of this episode's structure. It's a classic Family Guy move to split the family up and have them experience wildly different events. The show seems to be commenting on the performative nature of social media, the absurdity of influencer culture, and, of course, the dysfunctional dynamics of the Griffin family. It's a bit of a mess, but in a way that feels intentionally Family Guy-esque. The writing isn't the tightest, with the hide-and-seek plot feeling almost like a separate episode from the Vermont vacation, but the jokes land hard enough, and the sheer absurdity of Peter taping money to his stomach for ice cream is a visual that sticks with you. It's not a groundbreaking episode, but it's a solid example of the show's current formula. Take a mundane concept, inject it with extreme selfishness and bizarre twists, and see what sticks. The episode really starts to unravel, in the best way possible, when Quagmire, who was supposed to be helping Peter with his Instagram strategy, ends up accidentally taking Stewie with him on a flight to Paris. Yes, Stewie is in Quagmire's suitcase. This is the kind of plot contrivance that only Family Guy could pull off. And thus, the episode splits into three main threads: Peter and Lois's vacation, Brian and Stewie's escalating hide-and-seek rivalry, and Quagmire's accidental international parenting adventure.
It's a lot to keep track of, but that's the charm, I guess. The Vermont storyline is all about superficiality and chasing likes. Peter and Lois are living out a fantasy, completely detached from reality, and their conversations revolve around how many likes they're getting and how they can get more. It's a commentary on how people curate their lives online, presenting a perfect facade, while the real world and their actual responsibilities are ignored. The hide-and-seek plot, on the other hand, delves into Stewie's childhood and Brian's flawed mentorship.
Stewie is portrayed as incredibly intelligent and manipulative, even in a simple game, while Brian is constantly trying to keep up and failing spectacularly. This contrast between the superficial adult world and the surprisingly complex childlike games is where the episode finds its most interesting moments. Quagmire's situation in Paris adds a layer of frantic comedy as he tries to deal with Stewie while also pursuing his own romantic interests. It's a classic Quagmire scenario, and the writers lean into it heavily. The episode's structure is a bit disjointed, jumping from one ridiculous situation to another, but that's kind of the point, isn't it? It's Family Guy. You're not watching for a tightly woven narrative. You're watching for the jokes, the callbacks, and the sheer, unadulterated weirdness. And this episode delivers on that front, for better or worse. The writing is a mixed bag. Some jokes are brilliant, others fall flat, but the overall momentum carries you through. It's an episode that tries to do a lot, perhaps too much, but its commitment to absurdity is what makes it a Family Guy episode through and through. It's not the greatest episode of all time, but it's definitely memorable for its sheer, unbridled chaos. It's the kind of episode where you find yourself laughing at the sheer audacity of the plot points, even as you question the sanity of the writers. The ending, with Quagmire stranded in Paris with Stewie and Peter and Lois still blissfully unaware of the real problems back home, sets up a perfect storm of impending disaster, which is exactly what we expect and love from the show. Now, let's break down some of the moments that really made me pause, either in laughter or sheer disbelief. First up, that opening musical number. I mean, come on. It's the quintessential Family Guy "we miss the good old days" trope, delivered with maximum sincerity by the show that is literally built on tearing down anything remotely wholesome.
It's so overtly ironic, and then Peter just casually shows up in that shirt. The juxtaposition's the joke, right? He's clinging to this idea of wholesome nostalgia while wearing something that looks like it was designed by a fever dream of Saturday morning cartoons. And then Lois's obsession with Bonnie's likes. This is where the episode really taps into something modern and, frankly, a little sad. We all know someone who's glued to their phone, checking notifications, competing for that little red heart. Seeing Peter get caught up in it, even for a silly vacation, is a stark reflection of how social media has warped our brains. He's not doing it for genuine connection. He's doing it to win. And that $600 taped to his stomach? Pure visual comedy gold. It's gross, it's absurd, and it's exactly the kind of illogical decision-making we expect from Peter. He could have just used a credit card, but no, it's got to be taped to his gut. What does that even accomplish? Nothing, which is why it's funny. The Mr. Andy hide-and-seek invention is another level of meta-humor. The character presents this incredibly simple game as if he's revealing the secrets of the universe. One person hides in a top-secret spot, and the others count to 10, then try and find him. And he acts like he's discovered fire. The kid's deadpan reaction, yeah, we call that hide-and-seek, is perfect. It's the writers poking fun at themselves, acknowledging how derivative some of their own premises might be. It's a moment that makes you chuckle and think, did they really just do that? Then there's the Vermont trip itself. Lois sees it as an Instagram goldmine, and her entire motivation is to beat Bonnie's record. This entire plotline is about superficiality. They're not there for relaxation or romance. They're there for content. The way they argue about trivial things like how long to brush their teeth to maximize vacation time is a hilarious exaggeration of how people try to squeeze every last drop out of a holiday for the gram. Peter's advice to the kids about the security code 6969 is just a prime example of his juvenile humor. It's the kind of thing he finds hilarious, and it's meant to be a shocking, stupid joke for the audience too. It's so predictable, yet still lands because it's so perfectly in character for him. It's also a testament to how little he trusts his kids or Lois, really, that he thinks they'd need that code for a security system. The hide-and-seek game between Brian and Stewie is where things get genuinely interesting, though.
When Stewie hides in the closed-door refrigerator, Brian's panic is palpable. Don't ever hide in there. Could you even breathe? Stewie's flippant "no" is terrifying. This isn't just a game anymore. It's life and death, or at least severe oxygen deprivation. This moment really highlights Stewie's extreme intelligence and willingness to take risks, and Brian's inability to keep up. It raises the stakes and makes you wonder if Brian is actually cut out to be Stewie's guardian. The spanking scene that follows is even more shocking. Ryan's sudden, out-of-character violence is jarring. "That was me spanking you." It's meant to be a moment of stern discipline, but it comes across as disturbing. It's a clear indication that Brian is out of his depth and resorting to desperate measures. It forces you to question Brian's role in Stewie's life and the show's willingness to go to dark places. Then we have the whole Armageddon versus Deep Impact analogy Peter uses to describe Bonnie's social media posts. It's a perfect, albeit slightly dated, pop culture reference that perfectly captures the feeling of one person's achievement being overshadowed by another's. The idea of two disaster movies being released so close together, both trying to capitalize on the same theme, mirrors Peter's frustration with Bonnie. It's a smart, funny comparison that shows that writers are paying attention to how people compete. Quagmire accidentally flying Stewie to Paris is the ultimate Family Guy plot contrivance. He's supposed to be helping Peter, but instead he ends up with a baby in his luggage. This is peak absurdity. The idea that Stewie, a baby, could somehow sneak into a pilot's suitcase without anyone noticing is beyond belief, but that's exactly the kind of ridiculous scenario the show thrives on. It immediately raises the stakes and throws a massive wrench into everyone's plans. Quagmire's desperation to get rid of Stewie because he has 48 hours in Paris and a whole list of horny activities is hilarious and perfectly in character. He's prioritizing his sex life over a child's well-being, and the show just rolls with it. The ensuing phone call where Peter has to decide between going to Paris to get Stewie and continuing his vacation is a masterclass in selfishness. Lois, of course, is still caught up in her Instagram streak, and Peter is weighing his options based on superficial desires. The decision to leave Stewie with Quagmire under the guise of trusting a friend is just Peter being Peter.
He's not thinking about Stewie's safety, he's thinking about his vacation and his likes. The French announcer on the Paris Attractions channel is a nice touch, adding to the Parisian atmosphere and providing some exposition. The host's cluelessness about the Eiffel Tower, thinking it's only 100 feet, is a funny jab at uninformed tourists and plays into the idea that even the most iconic landmarks can be misunderstood. Stewie's comment about his mom thinking Lady Gaga is Goo Goo Dolls is a classic Stewie line. He's so sophisticated and dismissive of anything he considers less refined, and his reaction to the music choice is pure baby genius arrogance. The scene where Stewie and Quagmire jump on the bed, and Quagmire is surprisingly skilled at it, is unexpected. Miss Christie put me 2 from the middle at dance class winter demo. It's a glimpse into Quagmire's past that's both funny and a little sad, revealing a side of him that's not just about his sexual exploits. The noise complaint from the room below, with the guy yelling, "This is hotel, not Jungle Gym children's play structure," is a realistic and funny observation that most people can relate to. It grounds the absurdity of Quagmire and Stewie's antics in a relatable annoyance. Brian's existential monologue to Stewie about his past, "I've killed people, then I lost my virginity at 6 to our strangely female plumber," is peak Brian. He's always grappling with his past and his identity, and he sees a kindred spirit in Stewie, even if Stewie is a baby. The respect he gets from Stewie is a moment of genuine connection between them, despite the bizarre circumstances. The ending of the Paris storyline, with Stewie missing and Quagmire in a panic, is well executed. The taxi driver's nonsensical response about buy or to rent when Quagmire asks if he's seen Stewie perfectly encapsulates the absurdity of their situation and the language barrier. Quagmire's subsequent despair and his decision to call Brian because he's too ashamed to tell Peter is a classic Family Guy trope. He knows Peter will lose it, and Brian is the reluctant confidant. The comparison of Parisian people to trash despite the beautiful buildings is a harsh but funny observation, likely fueled by Quagmire's frustration. The final moments, with Quagmire finally admitting he lost Stewie and Brian's resigned sigh, set up a desperate search, making this episode's cliffhanger truly compelling. Speaking of characters, let's talk about who's shown and who just sort of existed in this episode. Peter, as usual, is the engine of chaos. His entire motivation revolves around one-upping Bonnie on social media and getting his Vermont ice cream fix. He's not evolving, he's not learning, he's just being Peter, which is exactly what the show wants. His selfishness is dialed up to 11 here, especially when he's presented with the choice of going to get Stewie or continuing his vacation. He chooses the vacation, and that's the joke. He's a terrible husband and father, but he's our terrible husband and father. Lois, bless her heart, is also caught up in the social media game. Her desire to beat Bonnie's record is almost as strong as Peter's. She's presented as the slightly more responsible one in the Vermont storyline, but she's still completely enabling Peter's ridiculous behavior. Her entire arc is about validation through likes, which is a pretty cynical take on her character, but it fits the show's current trajectory. Brian is the reluctant caregiver, and this episode really puts him through the ringer. He's stuck playing hide-and-seek with Stewie, and it's clear he's not equipped to handle Stewie's intensity. His attempts at discipline, like the spanking, are questionable at best and disturbing at worst.
His monologue about his past shows a character still grappling with his own demons, and he sees a reflection of his own complexity in Stewie, which is an interesting dynamic. Stewie, of course, is the real star of the home storyline. He's brilliant, manipulative, and utterly terrifying when he's hiding in a refrigerator. His intelligence is on full display, and he's the one driving the most interesting plot threads. He's also the reason Quagmire ends up in such a mess, which is always a fun dynamic. Quagmire, once he's accidentally Paris-bound with Stewie, becomes the frantic idiot pilot. His primary motivation is to get back to his planned romantic escapades, and Stewie is just an unfortunate obstacle. His desperation and flailing attempts to deal with a baby are classic Quagmire. He's out of his element, which is always good for a laugh, and his call to Brian is a sign of his utter defeat. Bonnie's role, while not physically present, is felt throughout the episode. She's the unseen rival, the one Peter is constantly trying to outdo. Her social media presence is the catalyst for the entire Vermont plot, and it highlights the show's commentary on online competition. It's a clever way to have a character's influence be felt without them actually being there, and it fuels Peter's ridiculous behavior.
Let's dig into some of the really subtle stuff, the bits you might have missed if you were too busy trying to process the sheer insanity. Remember Mr. Andy and his invention of hide-and-seek? That whole bit is a self-referential joke about Family Guy presenting basic concepts as groundbreaking. It's them winking at the audience, acknowledging their own, sometimes unoriginal premises. Then, when Peter describes Bonnie's posts undercutting his own, he uses the analogy of Armageddon and Deep Impact, and later Volcano and Dante's Peak, and even Prefontaine versus Without Limits. These are all examples of films with very similar themes or release dates trying to compete for audience attention. It's a surprisingly deep cut for a joke about Instagram likes, showing a keen awareness of cinematic history and how one release can overshadow another, mirroring Peter's exact problem with Bonnie. Speaking of movies, when Quagmire is in Paris, the TV channel he's watching is the Paris Attractions channel, and the host is comically clueless about the Eiffel Tower. This is a subtle jab at tourism and the way some people experience iconic landmarks without any real understanding or appreciation. It's a small detail, but it adds to the atmosphere of superficiality. The security code 6969 Peter gives the kids is of course a juvenile dick joke. It's a classic Family Guy move, hidden in plain sight as a supposed security measure. It's the kind of gag that if you're not looking for it, you might just hear the numbers and move on. But when you register the significance, it's a little embarrassing and very funny. And when Brian is talking to Stewie about his past, he mentions losing his virginity at 6 to their strangely female plumber. This is a callback, or at least a nod, to Brian's generally messed up upbringing and the weirdness that permeates the Griffin household. It's a brief line, but it reinforces the idea that Brian's current existential angst is deeply rooted in his past experiences. Even the French radio Quagmire is subjected to, WCOK, Le Coq, Rude 102, with a song about une direction and an Alouette reference, is a layered joke. It's mocking overly enthusiastic European radio stations, using French words incorrectly or in odd combinations, and then adding a bit of a playful jab at boy bands and classic French folk songs. It's a lot packed into a few seconds of background noise, designed to sound chaotic and slightly nonsensical, much like the episode itself. What if they had gone in a completely different direction with this episode? For starters, the whole Mr. Andy inventing hide-and-seek thing, it's funny, yeah, but what if instead of him introducing it, it was Stewie who genuinely invented some super complex, high-tech version of hide-and-seek, like a VR game or something? Then Brian could be the one struggling to keep up, and it would elevate Stewie's genius even further. It would make the contrast between Stewie's intellect and Brian's incompetence even starker. Or consider the Vermont vacation. What if Peter and Lois weren't just chasing likes? What if they were actually trying to reconnect, and the social media obsession was a barrier to that reconnection, rather than the goal itself? That would add a layer of genuine drama to their story, even if it's Family Guy drama. Imagine them trying to have a romantic moment, but Peter is constantly interrupted by notifications, and Lois is staging photos. It could have been a more poignant, albeit still cynical, take on modern relationships. And then there's the whole Paris situation. Instead of Quagmire just accidentally taking Stewie, what if Stewie intentionally snuck into the suitcase to escape Brian's overbearing yet incompetent guardianship? Stewie is always looking for an escape route, and Paris with Quagmire, a known degenerate, would be his idea of a wild adventure. It would make Stewie a more active participant in the chaos, rather than just a passive victim of Quagmire's travel plans. This change would make Stewie's character arc in this episode much stronger, showcasing his desire for autonomy and his willingness to take extreme measures to achieve it. It would also give Quagmire a more complex motivation for his actions, as he'd be dealing with an intentional stowaway rather than an accidental one. The original choice to have Stewie accidentally end up in the suitcase is funny, but it relies on a level of pure luck and convenience that feels a little too easy. By making Stewie's presence in Paris a deliberate choice, it adds a layer of cunning and agency to his character that, frankly, is more interesting. Okay, so my verdict for this episode is a solid 7.2 out of 10. Why 7.2? Well, it earns points for sheer audacity. The multiple storylines, the ridiculous premise of Peter's stomach money, Stewie in a refrigerator, Quagmire accidentally flying to Paris with a baby, that's all peak Family Guy chaos, and it's undeniably entertaining. The meta-commentary on social media and filmmaking was also a nice touch, showing the writers are still capable of clever observations.
However, it loses points because the plot threads don't always connect seamlessly, and some of the jokes, especially Brian's spanking incident, feel a bit too dark or uncomfortable for the overall tone. The ending, while setting up a good cliffhanger, also leaves you feeling a bit like, okay, now what? It's an episode that's very much for the ride-or-die Family Guy fans, who appreciate the show's relentless commitment to absurdity, even when it borders on nonsensical. If you love the show's willingness to push boundaries and embrace the ridiculous, you'll probably dig this. If you prefer tighter plotting and more consistent humor, you might find it a bit much. What would have pushed this score higher? A more cohesive integration of the Peter-Lois storyline with the Stewie-Brian-Quagmire plot. Having those two worlds collide more directly, rather than just running parallel, would have made the episode feel more unified. But that's Family Guy for you, right? Sometimes it's a beautiful, messy train wreck, and this episode is a prime example. It's the kind of episode that makes you question your life choices for watching it, but you keep watching anyway, because deep down, you know you wouldn't have it any other way. And just like Peter's stomach money, the sheer absurdity of it all is what makes it worth it.